Welcome to the Cambridge Financial Podcast with Bert Salazar, CEO at Cambridge Financial Partners, LLC. This podcast is all about tax-preferred retirement planning, economics, financial risk management, and achieving a risk-free and successful financial life. Now, your host, Bert Salazar.
Hey, good day, everyone. Welcome to another Cambridge podcast. I'm glad to be here with you again, as we do every single week. And obviously, as most of you have seen over the last year or so, we try to provide as much education as we possibly can in each and every one of the podcasts that we do for all of you. Many times we talk about specific subjects that are financial in nature, that are very critical for each and every one of us, especially those of you on this podcast and on the call. Other times I try to gather information from discussions that I have had with clients over the last 2 or 3 or 4 months. And many of the questions that my clients ask, I try to jot them down because I want to make certain that if a client is asking a question, I am almost sure that the vast majority of clients out there in the marketplace and the vast majority of Americans have questions that are similar in nature. So today's podcast is going to be food for thought. And I thought it would be a good idea to give you a little bit of a flavor of some of the different issues and concerns that we deal with at Cambridge when we're engaging clients for the first time. Because of the fact that we specialize in tax-preferred retirement planning, and because of the fact that we provide each and every client that we engage with a customized tax-preferred retirement blueprint, it is incumbent upon us to make certain that we ask as many questions as we possibly can in order to do the right type of work, in order to provide the right type of products for clients in a way that is going to enhance and maximize everything that they're doing from a business standpoint. Now, I'm going to share some ideas, and I'm also going to share some of the questions that I get asked often. So with that being said, let me just share some ideas for all of you on the call. Now, we all hear this all the time, especially in the financial news, that you got to get together to do a financial plan. You got to make certain that your financial plan is in order. You have to make certain that your financial plan is updated on a regular basis and so forth. But at the end of the day, we feel very strongly at Cambridge that financial planning is about guessing the future. And I am not, and neither is my company in the guessing game. So what we do for our clients are economic models, because financial planning has seldom, if ever, worked for a client, because you can't predict an outcome 15, 20, 25, 30 years down the line, let alone doing a very good job from a financial planning perspective. Another issue deals with inflation, and we all hear about the CPI rates and whether inflation is at 2%, 3%, or 5%, depending on which publication you read on any given day. But inflation has little to do with the cost of living, because each and every one of us has our own inflation rate, and our cost of living is going to be totally different than the cost of living of our next door neighbor, or a neighbor down the street, or a family member in another part of town or in another state. We all have different issues and concerns that we have to deal with in retirement, and it's only apropos that we apply those guidelines to our individual situation. Now, one of the challenges that I get all the time, because the vast majority of the clients that we engage have already done business or work with other financial advisors in the marketplace. And once we do a review of all the stuff that those clients have done in the past, we realize that there's very little rhyme or reason for that type of work to be done. And I think most of us in the financial services industry are guilty of that. And the reason for that is quite simple. Financial advisors lack science. They only learn sales. I was a registered principal for a major global Fortune 500 company for many years, and my job was to recruit, train, and develop new advisors into the financial services business. We did provide some basic education, but the vast majority of training that we did in the corporate world was based on sales, how to sell, how to handle objections, how to bring a product to light based on whatever company you're representing and the type of products that particular company may want the sales team to sell and so forth. So, not having the proper science creates some of the major financial issues and concerns that we deal with at Cambridge when we do audits on all these plans that our clients have done for many, many years. Now, I would argue that 99% of Americans are underinsured, and that applies not only to the area of disability, but most important to the area of, life assurance. You notice that I called it life assurance instead of life insurance. Now, the industry calls it life insurance, but I'm totally opposed to that definition, because whenever you insure a human life, you're actually not insuring that life, you're assuring that life. And the reason is simple. We as individuals, we as human beings, we matter. We feel, we have love, we provide love, we receive love. Insurance is for cars, homes, furnitures, toys, etc. Again, for instance, term insurance, it is actually insurance, it's not assurance. And the reason why term insurance is insurance and not assurance is because it expires. So obviously, as most of us know, almost 98% of all term insurance policies in the marketplace die before the clients do. So when you buy term insurance, and we do sell a lot of that, but our number one goal is to make certain that when we sell term insurance is to secure insurability, and then we start to convert the vast majority of those contracts to permanent contracts, and then they become life assurance instead of life insurance, because we want to make certain that the life assurance contracts that our client receive, they don't expire before the clients do. One of the questions I get asked often is, which is the best life insurance, as most Americans call it, in the marketplace? And my answer is always pretty simple. The best life assurance contract that you can purchase is the one that happens to be in place the day that someone dies. Now, many a times, if you truly understand the role of life assurance in a financial life, the vast majority of you would be calling me immediately to make certain that I can put together a strong life assurance contract because of all the things that it does. Not only at the time of death, if there is a premature death or so forth, but also from a disability standpoint, from a long-term care standpoint, from an asset protection perspective, and most important, as a way to provide tax benefits and to also enhance the efficiency of every other product that you may have in your portfolio from a financial perspective. Now, trying to pay off your debt, and this is another question that I get often, does it make sense, Bert, for me to pay off my debt before I start putting money away? And what I normally say is that trying to pay off all of your debt, it's going to hinder your exponential curve because you're not saving along the way. Now, for those of you that may not know this, if you look at any financial tool out in the marketplace, you will notice that many advisors are always talking about an exponential curve. Now, each and every one of us has an exponential curve. And by the way, you don't get a second chance on it. So you only have one exponential curve. And that is the exponential curve that the industry uses in addressing and showing different diagrams in the area of rates of returns and compounded rates of returns. So if you start putting money away, let's say in your traditional 401k plan when you're in your early 20s, it takes quite a few years for that 401k to grow. You're making contributions, you may get some matches, you get a return here and there, but at the end of the day, it takes years. Now, once you start to accumulate assets, you notice that the accumulation gets to be sped up. In other words, because you already have assets that are being built, you see that exponential curve that continues to head north up until the time of retirement, when you're going to stop contributions and you're going to start taking distributions. Now, the challenge for many of us when it comes to an exponential curve is that the vast majority of us do not know how to plan for it, and most of us have missed it from a business perspective. So, those are things that we discuss with our clients when we do our customized tax-preferred retirement blueprint. Some of the rules that we apply to any type of planning that we do at Cambridge, and we call it the CCMS, short for or an acronym for the Cambridge Capital Management System, is that in everything that we do for our clients, we want to make certain that they have maximum replacement value. That's very critical. We want to make certain that every asset that they possess, including their own human life value, it's insured and it's assured against maximum, or for the benefit of maximum replacement. So if your economic life value is worth $1 million, we want to make certain that we have your life assured for $1 million, because we want your family to be fully protected, so therefore they can maximize the income benefit, whether you are with them or not. Another area that we talk about to our clients all the time is that they need to be able to save 15% of their gross income. And many clients don't do that. Now, in the very early stages of your life, there's probably very little savings, if any. And then you may start putting money away, whether it's an IRA or a 401k, and you may be putting 2-3% away. Only when you get into your mid-50s do clients really start to expedite the savings process, because they realize that they don't have that many years to go in order to retire. Now, saving a minimum of 15% of gross income is going to help you offset taxes, inflation, market volatility, stock market volatility, interest rate volatility, opportunity cost, lawsuits, preponderance to consume, and many other eroding factors that we talk to our clients as we put the blueprint together for them. 401k contributions are based on rules, so we don't want our clients to just fully maxed out on their 401k contributions. We want to make certain that they can put money in their 401ks up to the match and not a dollar after that, or at the very, very most, not more than 7% of annual income. And the reason for that is, we want to make certain that they stay within certain thresholds, so when retirement time comes and we do provisional income calculations for them, we're not going to have a compounded effect on taxes that are going to have to be paid at retirement, because too much money is in the tax deferred bucket. Although we've talked about this before, whenever we engage clients from a taxable perspective, we talk about the three major tax buckets that each and every one of us have. You have your taxable bucket, which is what I call the 1099 bucket. And those are your savings accounts, your checkings, your traditional mutual funds, your CDs, etc. And those you get the beautiful love letter from the IRS every year, which is a 1099 that you have to file and pay taxes on the growth of that bucket in that given year. The second bucket is one that is mostly known by all of you, and that's a tax-deferred bucket. And that's what is known as 1099 later. That bucket primarily is your IRAs, your 403Bs, your 401Ks, your pensions, and so forth. And again, most of us know about that bucket quite well. Now, we don't have to pay that we don't get that 1099 every year, but that 1099 is actually deferred and is going to be sent to us at some point in time in the future. The problem with that tax-deferred bucket is, yes, you are deferring the taxes, but you're also deferring the tax liability. And the major question for all of you is, where do you think that taxes are going to be in the future? And obviously, based on all the calculations and based on all the historical data that we have, taxes are going to have to be much greater in the future in order to be able to pay, for all the debt and all the unfunded liabilities that we have in this country. Another area that we want to make certain that we work well with our clients is in making certain that they don't allow their assets to compound in a taxable account. Now the question is, well, what do you mean by this, Bert? Well, think of it this way. If you allow a taxable account, or if you have an account in your taxable bucket, and that account compounds every year, you're also compounding the taxes. So if I were to ask all of you on this call, on this podcast, a question, if you have a choice, would you rather have compound interest or simple interest? Now, 100% of you, unless you don't understand mathematics, you're going to say, Bert, we would like to have compound interest. Okay, and great. I fully agree with that. But if I were to ask you, would you rather have compound tax or simple tax? Again, unless you don't know much about math, your answer is going to be simple tax, and you would be correct. The challenge is that you cannot get compound interest and simple tax at the same time unless you have done proper planning and you have been able to eliminate the compounding effect of assets inside a taxable account. And for that, you need to have a tax-preferred retirement blueprint, which is one of the areas that we cover with our clients on a regular basis. And then last but not least, is you need to start protecting your assets. In other words, you have to protect against what can go wrong before you actually start protecting against what or investing in what could go right. Many other questions whenever we talk about asset allocation, because I get asked this often, where does it make sense to put my money in? Am I investing in the right vehicles? Am I going to be okay at time of retirement? Those answers, the questions are complex, and the answers could be more complex, but I try to simplify matters on behalf of my clients because for them, simplicity is quite important. So one of the questions that I normally ask is, look, if you were putting money away in retirement for the last 10, 15, 20 years, did you get out of the market in 2008? And if the answer is yes, then I tell the clients that they can't handle risk. Because if you got out of the market in 2008 because of the volatility of the market and because overnight your 401k became a 201k, then you don't have the taste and you don't have the ability to manage risk. Another question that I ask often of my clients is, what is your retirement plan? And the first answer that I get is, actually, sometimes I don't get answers. I just get copies of statements where they have their 401k statements or their IRAs or their investments in mutual funds and so forth. But that is not truly a retirement plan. Those are just products inside of a retirement account. And obviously that's one area that we work very closely with our clients as well. The one question that I never get an answer to is not necessarily one dealing with what is your retirement plan, but what is your distribution plan? You see, if you have been putting money away in retirement, in the hopes of retirement, because you want to retire at age 65. Most of the clients that I engage for the first time, they have all of their assets in one basket. And it's all about retirement. It's all about contribution, but it's not about distribution. And you gotta remember that when it comes to retirement, the rules of engagement totally change when you go from accumulation to distribution. During accumulation, you're concerned about the rates of returns and so forth. But when it comes to distribution, it's about the distribution rate. It is no longer about the rate of return. And it's also about making certain that you have the least amount of risk, if any, possible on your retirement assets. Now, most of us here, when it comes to risk, we hear and we read articles and we go out and Google, asset allocation planning. And most of us have heard of something called Monte Carlo simulations. And Monte Carlo simulation is a simulation program that is done primarily by major wirehouses when they're trying to bring money under management from assets that clients own throughout the United States. What is interesting to note is that Monte Carlo simulations is not safety planning, is probability planning. And that's a major difference between probability and safety. Because when it comes to retirement distribution planning, sequencing of returns have a major impact. You see, this same client that in 2008 did not pull out of the market, so he or she was able to manage risk and allow for the account to recover, they were able to do so years down the line because of a couple of things. Number one, the client was still employed, so he or she did not have a need to use that 401k that just became a 201k overnight. He or she was still making contributions to that 401k or 201k, and he or she was still receiving a match from their employer along those lines. So as long as you don't need the money, it's a paper loss, so you can allow that money to recover, hopefully in a more efficient manner. Now, when it comes to distribution planning, sequence of returns play a major role. Because if you were retired in 2008 and you needed to start taking distribution out of your account and your 401k had just become a 201k, but you had no choice but to take money out because you needed to maintain your standard of living, guess what you did? You just compounded the negative effect or the sequencing of return effect on your 201k. So now it may take many more years for that account to recover. And based on many of the calculations that I did for a number of my clients, those accounts are yet to be recovered to the level that they were before, and we're already in 2018. The other thing to pay attention to is that, probability only applies to other people, not to you. So the probability of something happening really doesn't mean anything to you from a business perspective. Now, you would want to question me about, my statement about probability, and let me answer it to you in an analogy that may make sense. Let's say you're at Miami International Airport. You get to the airport, you have a flight on American Airlines or any other airlines for that matter. I fly American all the time. And you're going to fly from MIA, which is Miami International Airport, to LAX, which is Los Angeles Airport. When you get inside the airplane and you sit down, the pilot, the captain comes on and says, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Captain Morris, and today we're going to be flying from MIA to Los Angeles. Flying time is going to be 5 hours and 25 minutes at an altitude of 30,000 feet. Now, before we close the doors, I just want to let you know that I have done some Monte Carlo simulations, and we have done some probability simulations in our system. And we have a report that there is an 80% probability that we're going to have enough fuel in this airplane to get us to LAX in a safe manner. Now, the question that I would ask of all of you, how many of you are going to stay inside that airplane? The answer is going to be probably none of you, especially when the pilot says, and by the way, if you're uncomfortable about the fact that we have an 80% probability of getting there with enough fuel to be able to land, there's another airplane that will be leaving MIX to ALX in 3 hours from now, and the calculations on that particular flight shows that there's a 100% probability of having enough fuel to get us to LAX. Are you going to stay in the 80% airplane, or are you going to gut it out, get out of that flight, and wait 3 hours for the 100% probability? I would argue that the answer is going to be the 100% probability. So at the end of the day, always remember that the probability of retirement is very critical for each and every one of you, because you don't want to run out of fuel before you land. In other words, you don't want to run out of income before you run out of life. And that is the type of work that we do at Cambridge, because at the end of the day, we want to make certain that our clients, when it comes to retirement, that they are fully protected in the four major risks that each and every one of you are going to be facing at some point in time in the future. The risk of dying too soon, the risk of living too long, the risk of living with a disability, and last but not least, the risk of living with eroding factors like, taxation, inflation, stock market volatility, interest rate volatility, preponderance to consume, financial fees, inflation, lawsuits, etc. So these are things that are very, very critical for all of us to be able to consider from a business perspective. And so forth. And I think it's critical as we approach the end of this podcast to understand is that, and especially it's been happening in the last few years because the market has been increasing quite nicely, but there's going to be a market crash. I just don't know when that's going to be, and it's more than likely going to be sooner than later because, we have had a market uptrend now for a long time, and things when it comes to market volatility don't always go up, for many, many years. Now, most clients are very proud. They look at their financial statements. They notice that their account is doing fairly well. But what I do say to them is that, look, do not confuse intelligence with the bull market, because a bull market is gonna take the market in a northern direction, and there's not much that you could do. You could be a monkey throwing darts blindfolded, and you can still do fairly well in today's market. Now, I do say that only when the tide goes down will you know who's swimming naked. And that happens all the time. And a rising tide raises all ships. So as long as the tide is going up, it doesn't matter what kind of an investment you have. Chances are you're going to do fairly well. But when the tide goes down, unless you're properly protected from all of those potential catastrophes you and your family may face, you will then realize who is swimming naked from a business perspective. I want to leave you with a last thought, and this is something that I do ask of clients during my initial retirement interview with them, and I ask although we do ask, and I do ask many questions, but there are two critical questions that I ask. Number one is, do you want more risk or less risk in retirement? And I sit quiet and I listen to them. 99.9% of the time, the answer is, I want less risk in retirement. And the second question that I ask is, do you want your principal to go down or stay the same in retirement? And 99% of the people I deal with tell me that they want their principal to stay the same, and the guarantees to stay the same, and the income, which is even more critical, to stay the same or increase in order to maximize and minimize the risk of inflation in retirement. So, as I always say at the end of every single podcast, hopefully you're getting a benefit from all this information, because the number one job for me and for my firm is to help you change the way that you see things. And the reason for that is, when you change the way that you see things, the things that you see actually change, because the more information you have, the better it is. But education is even more of a paramount than you can imagine, because information without education always leads to failure. Thank you so very much for your time, and we'll talk again next week.